And today we have a speaker, Dr. Desmond Stephens. And Dr. Stephens has been a friend of mine for a number of years. And so I should be able to introduce him without any notes. But I just wanted to go ahead and give him what he is due and actually do a formal introduction. Dr. Stephens is an experienced associate professor of mathematics with more than 25 years of teaching experience. He also serves as the university director for faculty development, where he focuses on using effective teaching strategies to engage students and improve learning. With leadership roles as the Quality Enhancement Plan's faculty development coordinator and director of the Innovative Academic Instruction Project, he has designed active learning spaces and provided faculty training on best teaching practices. Dr. Stephens has successfully obtained over $7 million in funding for initiatives in teaching and learning and is currently a co-PI and director for the STEM Center for the Advancement of Learning, Achievement, and Research, an NSF-sponsored activity that improves STEM students' learning experiences and provides support and guidance for faculty development, teaching, and learning research projects. Dr. Stephens has been a Florida resident for over 30 years and proudly calls Florida home. He holds a master's and doctorate degree in mathematics from Florida Tech and a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics from Delaware State University. He's a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, where he participates in community service activities with the March for Babies and mentors young African-American males through his work with the Alpha Educational and Leadership Foundation. Dr. Stephens is happily married to Dr. Sonia Stephens and is the proud parent of 2 children. Christian, who is completing his bachelor's degree in environmental science and economics at the University of Florida, and Taylor, who is pursuing a PhD in chemistry at the University of Wisconsin. And Dr. Stephens, I just want to welcome you. We are going to hear about motivating students, and we're just looking forward to what you have to talk to us about today. Just one brief thing as we proceed through the presentation. If anybody has a question or comment, please just turn on your camera and go for it. Or if you prefer, you can put it in the chat and we will get to it that way. So thank you very much. Dr. Stephens.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. I don't know who that guy is you introduced, but he seems like he might be all right. So thank you all for having me. I was talking to Dr. Moore this morning, and the idea of having some workshop like this with graduate students really excites me. And it's been something I've been wanting to do for a while, because your role is so integral in, undergraduate progression, and particularly because you're probably working with, if you're a TA, with critical courses. Those courses probably have lots of students in them, and you're a lifeline for those students. So I think that's, very important for you all to be exposed to some of the best practices in teaching and learning. And as I go through the talk, we'll talk about how that's really lacking for those of us who are getting degrees in areas that are outside of education. So as Dr. Moore said, I want to talk to you today about motivating students. And then I'm going to add this little piece about activating prior knowledge. And this is coming from one source, and there are about 3 chapters from this book that I'm going to kind of pull together and try to give you some background as to how students think, how their minds are developed, and then how you can leverage that knowledge to really get the most out of them. And you all may find some of this is useful to you all as well. So as I said, I'm going to kind of go through a bit of an introduction first, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about how knowledge is organized, and then we'll talk about motivation and this idea of class climate. And in there, I'm going to give you 10 strategies that you can use that might be very helpful for your students. And as we go through this, I'm anticipating that, some of you all may be working on master's degrees, but a lot of you all are working on PhDs, and before you know it, you're going to be in academia. So some of these things are going to kind of teeter on what it might look like for you as a new faculty member as well. And there might be some things that you can go back and suggest to your supervisor that you all can do that might be beneficial to students. So just keep that in mind. And as Dr. Moore said, please jump in. We're a small group, so if you have any questions, just jump in. All right, so breaking news. Most teaching assistants and STEM faculty members have had little to no teacher training. If you are not in the education area, your experience has probably been at some point, a PI looked at you and said, "You're not too dumb. Come on in this classroom and help these students," and then you just go, right? And so This is true for almost all of us. We had no teaching experience really outside of being a TA or maybe a tutor as an undergrad, but we have all this content knowledge. And we'll talk about how that's actually in conflict when we're trying to teach novices. Okay, so how are we trained? You know, as I mentioned, most of y'all over there at the FAMU-FSU College of Engineering, I know that when I was in school, the first picture is how I was taught, right? That there was a huge lecture hall. I was taking Calculus 1, Physics 1. We had 300 or 400 students in that room, a general chemistry class, the same thing. And there might be 10 TAs that are in there, and then we would go to recitation sections. But we had a professor that was standing up on a stage. Back then in the 80s, Dr. Moore, it was a series of boards that they could push up and down, chalkboards, and that's how we were instructed. That bottom picture is very interesting because it speaks to what could become a problem. That faculty member is actually teaching in one lecture hall and being projected so that she can teach in yet a second lecture hall. So 2 lecture halls at once because of this integration of technology, which is not always the best thing. All right, as I said that what we're doing today is that the source is really this book on how learning works, and this is the second edition. The first edition was not 8 research-based principles, but there were 7 then. So 1 principle has been added, and this is going to be the source. I put this here so that I did not have to attribute every single thing that I say as I go through, and any of the figures and other things, they're all coming from this source, so you'll just know that. So first, let's talk a little bit about knowledge organization. And so one of the things that we want to make sure we understand is that students' prior knowledge can help or it can hinder their learning. And so an example I want to give you is in psychology, there's this idea of, what are the words? What am I trying to think about here, Dr. Moore? Sometimes you get a little older and you forget. Negative and positive reinforcement, right? Mm-hmm. So you talk about positive reinforcement, people are pretty good. They have an intuitive feeling for that. Negative reinforcement, it's very difficult for students to understand that that's not about something bad happening. So for example, if you ask students in a first semester psychology class, if a child does something wrong and the parent takes the cell phone, is that an example of negative reinforcement? Almost all of them will say yes. Right? Or if we go back to the 60s or 70s, if we say a child does something wrong and they get a spanking, that's a negative reinforcement. They'll think of it that way. Mm-hmm. But it really turns out that negative reinforcement is about removing something that is unwanted to get a desired response. So you could think about it as you have a mouse that's on a pad that is receiving a gentle electric shock until it hits the right lever. And when it hits the right lever, the shock is taken away. So we remove something that was not desirable, right, to get a desired result. We want the mouse to hit the switch. But that's very difficult for students to understand. And so they will come into subsequent psychology classes never really understanding what negative reinforcement is, and it kind of messes up all the things that come after that. And these things, for all of us in the STEM area, I think that Dr. Eric Mazur, who is the godfather of this idea of peer instruction at Harvard in the physics department, talks about these as concept tests. These are areas where students have tremendous difficulty, and these should be the focus of what we're working with them on to help them develop. So there's an idea where students are bringing in all this prior knowledge. They've taken all these classes before that are supposed to have them ready for this course, but there's some things that just are not quite right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you think about prior knowledge, it could hinder learning. And kind of from the example that I just mentioned, it could be that the prior knowledge is just inactive. They have it, but they have no idea that they should be using it at this particular time. So it's just dormant. It could be that it's insufficient. So they have some of it, but they've never developed all of it. And now we're here at this place where we're expecting they have it all. It could just be straight inappropriate. I teach a calculus course, and I ask students every time, remember, if you divide by 0, that's not 0. And they'll still say 5 divided by 0 is 0 at the calculus level, right? And so it could be inaccurate, inappropriate. It could be that they're using some sort of prior knowledge in a case where it doesn't apply, right? So that's how it could hinder. But if we could activate it, right? So make sure that students knew, oh, when we're doing this calculus problem, we're actually going to need the unit circle. I realize that you've activated something that I didn't know before. That is sufficient. I actually know everything about the unit circle that I need to know. It's appropriate. I'm using the unit circle and not the law of cosines or sines, right? And then it's accurate. I actually know that the square root of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2 and not 1/2, right? So if you can do that, then you can leverage the fact that the students have some prior knowledge, but you can make sure that they're using it in the way that's supposed to be used. And often we don't think about that our students come to us in this way. We just say, oh, the students took trigonometry or they took physics, right? So they took physics too. They should be ready for statics. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, right? There might be some things that we need to work on. And particularly those of us who are in like a TA or tutoring capacity, this is where these are boots on the ground, right? So you're working with students and you can see where these gaps are. And so you want to really think about how you can fill those in. If we think about how knowledge is organized, for a novice, it's sparse and superficial. Again, using my example of the unit circle. A student who's just taking trigonometry, somebody can jump in because you all aren't that far away. How do people learn the unit circle when they first start? What do you think most people do? Don't be shy out there, students who I know need students to know the unit circle and they don't.
I start by breaking down into the 4 quadrants and then moving after that and then add up like incrementally the different sides.
And is that how you got the unit circle, or is that how you think your students did?
Well, I'm not a teacher, but that's how I remembered learning it. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if that's how the teacher taught it to me or if that's how I remember learning the process. But that's how I remember learning it.
Okay, and if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that you, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think you were saying that you went through the quadrants and then you memorized the angles. Is that what you did?
I memorized the different quadrants, the input and the output, and then I look inside the different circles to see how each one would like pair up.
Yeah. I think I did the same thing, Dr. Stevens, as Sewall just mentioned. I feel like I didn't understand it. And so I just memorized it at first. You know, that X was positive and Y were positive in the first quadrant, you know, just kind of memorized it. Didn't know what I was doing, but I had it in memory.
That was what I was trying to get at. I think you all both hit it. That initially, the students who have the unit circle, they memorize it, right? And you all actually kind of, because Sewall actually mentioned a way that he almost was working towards novice, because he caught on that, wow, if I memorize it in one quadrant, there's some things that I could do so I would know it in all the quadrants. I don't have to just memorize all the way around. But there are literally some students who are like, oh, you know, I'm at 330 degrees. What's that? And they have no idea that that's the same somewhere else, right? They're memorizing it all the way around the circle. And so you can imagine all the difficulties you get, right? That you all are there, you're teaching statics or something else, and students don't know how to figure out what the cosine of pi over 3 is, right? Because what's happened is that they memorize it for a minute. It was organized like it is on this slide. And the only way they could ever get it back is to just go back and memorize it again, because they had no connections to anything else, right? But experts are different. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, because what experts do is they make connections all over the place. Well, why is it? Because me as a math professor who's been teaching mathematics for 30 years, I'm no longer running around trying to make sure that I'm using bandwidth and, you know, ROM to store all of those angles, right? I can think about other things because I know how to recreate that anytime I need it, right? But that just comes from experience. Or somebody saying to you, hey, organize it differently, right? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, here's where you all status gets in the way. Dr. Moore probably can definitely appreciate this. When you are a graduate student, particularly the day before you defend your dissertation or your master's thesis, you are working to the place where you will actually be the smartest you will ever be in your subject area. It's all downhill after that. But up to that point, you are working to be the smartest you will ever be. And that comes from hard work. That's not magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what that does is it makes you think that everything is easy. It all makes sense. But then at the same time, you're in the lab, you're going to teach freshmen. You're in the lab, you're going back to teach freshmen. And that's a complete disconnect because you're looking at your freshmen and say, hey, how come y'all don't just get this? Can't you see this connection? No, they can't. They haven't been working on it like you. But that's the conflict, right? It's at the time when all of it makes sense. All the lights are bright for us in our subject area, yet we're trying to teach students who are just beginning, and we have completely forgotten about what it felt like when we were in their positions, right? And so we have to fight against that because that is actually something that will get in the way.
I have heard some people say that sometimes new faculty will be the hardest, maybe Dr. Stephens for that same reason. They're fresh out of school and they hit the ground running, just expecting that the students will know more than they're ready to more than they actually can do.
That's an excellent way to put it too, because it's about the expectation, because we feel then like, well, if you're not seeing it like I'm seeing it, it's got to be a lack of effort on your part. Because if you just put it in the work, you would see it like I'm seeing it and you would get it. And that does, it just gets in the way, right? So we just have to be cognizant of that. It's nothing wrong with being the best we're ever going to be. We just have to remember they're not all Michael Jordans like me. They're not all LeBron James. And so we just got to live with the fact that they're going to miss a few shots every now and again. I was talking to you all about the differences in the way that experts organize. And let's go back to my example of the unit circle. So the way I organize a unit circle is I just think of a triangle. And as an expert, when I see a unit circle, often Calculus 1 students don't even know why you call it a unit circle. They don't understand that it's a radius 1. They don't understand that there's an inscribed triangle for every one of the angles. They don't understand that you don't have to remember the cosine and sine for the 30, 60, 90 triangle. You could just remember which side's longer, which side's shorter. The longer side that's not the hypotenuse has got to be root 3 over 2 because that's bigger than 1/2. The shorter side is 1/2. And then you can just recreate the cosine and sine of pi over 3 and pi over 6 anytime you want to without ever having to memorize it. So, but that's something that I didn't even grasp until after I'd already started teaching. Before, I relied on the fact that every semester I was doing something with trigonometry, so I just kind of remembered it. But it took me a while before I could tell students, hey, you could throw that sheet out that you're always begging me to hold on to. You just need to know one triangle, because basically all the other ones you can memorize because where they lie on the circle. But all that to say is that that's how I organize that as an expert. Not to mention that if you told me that Sally got lost in the woods and you told me that she was on this street when she started and she walked 3 miles northeast, that I could figure out how far away she was from her initial spot just by using trigonometry. That too is a connection that students may not be able to make without somebody telling them. So we're just thinking about how there's a difference between expert and novice knowledge organization and where will teaching opportunities come in. And so the moral of that is that, we want to help students make these connections and provide explicit knowledge organizational structures, right? We want to be very explicit. I need to tell my students, hey, the way you get this unit circle is let's look at these triangles, right? I don't want to wait for them to kind of magically figure that out on their own and then be disappointed when they don't understand that and they keep getting the unit circle wrong. So now let's move into, some of the motivational parts that we kind of understand how students are coming to us and how they're structuring and organizing their knowledge, and think about what drives them. So the first thing I ask you, and I laugh, so I give it away. Yeah, your students are coming because they just want to learn for learning's sake. That's why they're showing up. because they said, ooh, mechanical engineering is just so exciting. I would just go and sit and learn this if it had no grades associated with anything or none of that, right? So I don't even think we need to ask a question. That's probably not what's driving a 19-year-old aspiring mechanical engineer, right? That's probably not what's driving. It would be great if it was. And all we're doing is trying to get them to that, because that's what's driving you all, right? That you all have a love for an area and you're willing to put in this work because you love it. What about this? This was the image that I had on the first slide, right? So does this motivate students?
I was motivated this way.
Many of us were motivated this way, right? Probably not exactly like this, but if any of us played a sport, we're in the band or any of those other things, we certainly were motivated like this. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about it. It actually works in sports. And in a minute, we'll explain why this works in sports. And it may not work in a calculus class, right? Probably get me fired in a calculus class, but it would not get the football coach from FAMU or FSU fired, right? As a matter of fact, this is the expectation. Yeah. Another one that Dr. Moore might recognize is a look to your left and look to your right.
People gonna be gone.
Two of y'all won't be here, right?
They got two of y'all will get Fs.
That's right. Two of y'all are going to flunk or going to quit, but you have to be built a certain way if you want to be a mechanical engineer. And we're perfectly all right with just taking a third of you all, because that's the magical number, right? And the question is whether or not that would motivate our students, right?
Maybe in the past.
That may be in the past. That's
but
right.
Not anymore.
That's right. That's right.
So. I think that we are more so taking the stance, Dr. Stephens, that every student, the one on the right and the left and the middle, can get it if we give it to them in the correct manner. So
that is exactly right. We have completely changed our paradigm in education. And by the way, it would not even be acceptable to do that anymore, right? Because we are all working from the position that every student can be successful if we give them what they need. And so now let's talk a little bit about what drives motivation. And so the first thing are values, and we'll kind of get back to our sports analogy, right? So if you want me to do something that I value, that'll help my motivation. The other thing is this really cool thing called expectancy. And I'll define it in a minute, but really expectancy is if you tell me to do something and I do it, I should get the result that you have advertised I'm going to get. Right? If I have this expectancy, okay, you got me out here running around a football field at midnight. You're telling me that's going to help us win. I will come out here at midnight and run around the football field because you said we didn't practice well. I value the fact that I want to be on a national championship football team. So I'm willing to do whatever you ask me to do, right? I'm highly motivated. That works that way on the football field. That's not going to work that way in the classroom, but you're doing the same thing, giving pathways to success, and then tapping into what students value. We're going to talk about students have all different types of values, so we have to realize that there might be lots of ways that we can tap in, but that's what's going to drive the motivation. Once I'm motivated, then I'll get involved in goal-directed behaviors. I'll start doing all the stuff. My goals will be lined up so that I get to the thing that I want to do because I'm highly motivated to do it. And then, of course, if I got goal-directed behaviors, then my learning and my performance, whatever it is that I'm working on, is actually going to be improved, right? So this is the idea. We got to motivate them by tapping into their values and by giving them pathways to success. Then we're going to help make sure that they have these goal-directed behaviors that are in line with what they have claimed through their motivation they want to do. And then the results will come. That's how we're going to look at this. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, and this is going to have a few definitions. That's okay. There's no test at the end. I just want you to kind of get an idea so you understand the terminology. So we're going to look at the goals, values, self-determination is really, really important. And then we'll talk a little bit about expectancy. So first, let's look at the goals. So there are these things called performance goals. And one of them is something called a performance approach goal. And this is where students meet standards to appear competent. So I have a son who's kind of like this. He never wants to not seem like he's the best. So he is highly motivated because he always wants to get the best grade in every class he's in, right? So he's motivated to prove every single test, every single assignment that he's highly competent. Another performance goal would be a performance avoidance goal. This would kind of be the opposite. This is a student that's highly motivated to do stuff so they can avoid appearing incompetent.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like a negative thing. And actually, that's not good, right? Because that's a symptom of other feelings that kind of fight against student success, right? But most students fall into these performance goals, right? Because what's the one thing that every student who cares about school is trying to do? They're trying to get an A in the class, right? So they're really about performance. They're trying to make sure they convince you that they aren't incompetent or that they're competent, but either way, they're going to get a good grade. And these aren't the best ways. As a matter of fact, I'm starting to read a book called Ungrading, which is about this idea of not grading students at all and how that changes the way they approach things. Another type of goal is a learning goal. And this is where students just say, hey, I'm involved in some activity and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can from this. And you can see how this might be in conflict with performance goals.
That's right. I can see that.
You can see it, right? Because
if the students, like you said, if they're trying to get A's, if A is the goal because of scholarships and job offers after graduation and all of that, then I'm trying to do whatever I can to get an A, even if I don't learn the material. You know, for example, I memorize it for the exam. I used to do that.
Yes.
Right. So you memorize it for the exam, you get an A on the exam, then 2 weeks later, you do not know it.
That's right.
Right.
And that's exactly, I mean, literally that's it. I memorized the unit circle because there's a test on the unit circle tomorrow. And I don't feel that I have the time or it even makes sense to put in the extra effort to try to understand these triangles that Dr. Stephens is talking about, right? And so they're in conflict. And then, of course, there's a work avoidant goal. Look, I'm trying to figure out the least amount I can do to get the best result I can get, right? And that's how I approach everything, right? So if Dr. Moore says read 10 pages, I'm gonna see if I can get it by reading 6 because I'm trying to find the least common denominator, which again, that goal has nothing to do with the learning process, right? Then there are effective goals. Like I want to do something because it makes me feel good, right? Change my mood, my feelings, or my attitudes, right? And then, of course, social goals are important when you're talking about young college students. There's a desire to improve their social connections. By the way, you could see how you can tie all of these things together, right? So I could have a group project that took care of the social. It could be something that made people feel better. I mean, you have to think about that, right? So it could attack the affective part. You could get students excited about something so they were really more involved in the learning process because maybe you minimize what it took to get a good grade, right? So you could tweak those levers to get students to do whatever you want to do. For example, if you wanted your students to get comfortable with working in groups, you could tweak the performance goal part by saying that your group participation was going to be worth more than some other aspect of the activity, which would encourage them to work in groups. So you have all these levers you can move because you know that your students have varied goals at any particular time.
Dr. Stevens, you're saying that I thought that the goals were just things that students have, they have goals, but you're saying that we should be directing or designing activities, homeworks, whatever it may be, so that we touch on different goals that students may have.
Depending on the outcomes that we want. Exactly. And that's why I say, for example, I'm saying, okay, in this course or in my recitation sections, I know that it's going to be better for my students to work in groups. How am I going to encourage students who are sitting there saying, I don't want to work in groups to actually start working in groups? I know that they get started. We all have had this experience either as students or faculty that initially students don't want to do it, then they would never not want to be in the groups if you're able to get them to work correctly. So all you do is you tweak the levers so that you are incentivizing the working in group part. Now you wouldn't do that for the whole time. You do that to kind of, catalyze that. But you're realizing that your students are coming to this and they've got many goals. They do want to do well in your class. They want to be mechanical engineers, but they want to be social. They want to feel good about what they're doing, all those things. So you can leverage that to get them more involved in their learning, which is motivating, right? Got it. And kind of in the example I said, so maybe a student's like, they got a study session that they could go to. There's some club registration sessions that are up that night, but they're not feeling well. And so what are they going to do? They're going to do that thing that they value the most at the particular time. So maybe I'm not feeling well, I'll just go to bed, right? That's like a health goal. I want to be healthy. But maybe I really want to get into a fraternity or sorority. So I'm going to go to the club registration. Even though I know I have a test, I'm going to miss the study session. So just realizing your students have all these things going on at the same time as young people coming to college, and how you can tap into that to get out of them what you want. Let's talk a little bit about values. So they're what are called attainment values, and these are values for completing a test. So kind of think about checklists. And I actually come into work almost every morning and I make a checklist just because I get like this thrill of checking things off, right? So it's attainment value. There's the intrinsic value. Like I really like doing this. Be like a student who writes a program for a class, yet they spend extra hours working on the program, adding tweaks that are not even part of the assignment, right? All of us who like to program, I know that we've done that, right? Oh, I get to print out differently, or I get to change the colors, or, I have the numbers going in this great looking table, right?
That's one of the best things about programming.
That's right. It's like it's a rabbit hole, right? If you do it, it's like playing a video game, like you can't get up. But that offers some intrinsic value. We kind of feel good about what we're working on, and we would do it for free, as people say. Then there's utility value, right? And that's a value from how an activity helps you accomplish other important goals. So you could think about a student who comes to a school and says, I want to be an engineer because they're going to make a lot of money, right? Or I want to be a doctor because I had family members who had cancer. I have a friend who, he's the same age as me. He retired from the military at 38 as a lieutenant colonel. A couple of years ago, he went to law school and got a law degree solely because he was on the city council and he was fighting with Walmart, and he wanted to be able to actually go in court and take care of it himself. So he just went to law school just for that purpose. No other reason whatsoever. Has no intentions of ever trying any cases with anybody. He just did it for that. So that is a utility value, right? He said, I got to go fight Walmart. I don't want to pay lawyers. I'll just go learn how to be a lawyer myself.
Wow. He's picking a fight with a big boy.
Big boys, yep. Now let's talk a little bit about self-determination. And here's a part where you would have, to use a word, you'd have a lot of autonomy if you ran the class. You may not have a lot of autonomy if you're Dr. Moore TA, because he's going to decide. But it is the idea of providing students choices over their own behavior whenever you can. And what that might look like is if you were a faculty member, you might say, I need to assess your ability to do X. And here's how we could do it. You could take a test. You could create a video. You could create a podcast. You could write a paper, right? You're giving students multiple ways to demonstrate competency so they feel like they have some choices. It could be the case that you say, we're going to have a project, and here are 10 different topics that you could choose. You can choose the one that you would like to do most. Right? So this is giving students the feeling that they have some control, right? And that they can choose to express knowledge in a way that they're most comfortable with. The other thing is that students need to have this feeling of competence, right? So they need to be able to show success. That does not go unnoticed. And then it's the idea of relatedness. If you're a TA, this is probably not a problem, right? Because undergraduates know that you are the not monster that can help them. The faculty member's a monster, but you're the not monster. So you probably have, if you're like most of us, you've got an undergrad or two latched onto your leg right now that won't ever leave you because they love you to death, because you're the thing between that evil professor who doesn't know how to explain things, and you're the only one in the world who can explain it to them. But as faculty members, you have to realize that just because of the power dynamic, you start off as the evil monster. and that you have to make these connections with the students on a human level to get them to buy in, right? And again, as we saw the coaches, we know that a coach, a band director, the reason why we perform for coaches is because we know that even when they're yelling and screaming, weirdly, we think they love us, right?
Mhm.
And that's what we have to be doing in terms of faculty and our relationships with our students.
You know, some of these participants are grad students who actually TA other grad students. They're just further along.
Yes.
So they're
Yes.
even, I guess you would say, a little bit closer in terms of, you know, they might only be a year ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that in my experience, and yours may have been the same, Dr. Moore, that I think after my first year, I got about 18 hours, then I was able to teach a course on my own.
Mhm.
And so I would imagine that there could be some places, I didn't have a TA, but there could be some places where some first year graduate students were TAing for second or third year graduate students in an area.
Yeah.
And so for those graduate students, you really are starting to get a real feel for what it looks like to run your own course from start to finish. The last thing I want to talk to you about before you look at some of the strategies is this idea of expectancy. And I kind of talked to you about it before, but it's this positive outcome. So it's saying, if I do what I've been asked, I'll get the desired result. So I want to be careful when we say to students, hey, if you do A, B, and C, you should be good. And then they do A, B, and C, and they aren't. And we also have to be careful, because I have fallen into this trap, and it's easy to fall into it. The student comes and says, I did A, B, and C, like you said, but I didn't get the desired result. And then we just try to explain them why they didn't do A, B, and C the way that we wanted them to, which is kind of an out, right? Because we should be telling them exactly what it takes to get from A, B, and C to a desired result. And as a TA or faculty member, we should be monitoring how they're doing A, B, and C so that we're correcting them every time they're not on the right path, right? So the students really need to know that there is a pathway, because if they don't believe there's a pathway, then you're going to lose your motivation, right? And that goes into this idea of efficacy. So the students have to actually say, okay, you say, okay, do A, B, and C. Now, as a student, I have to believe that I can actually do A, B, and C. Because if you ask me to do something I feel is impossible, then I'll lose my motivation as well. And again, that's where you all will come into, because you got to recognize, hey, Desmond can't do A. I got to work with him on that so he'll be ready, right? Because I can't have him out there struggling trying to do A. And we're doing that without judgment. So that does mean that, you know, if I'm a senior engineering student, I'm struggling with the, with the unit circle, somebody's got to help me, right? To the best of their ability. Otherwise, I won't be successful, right? So we got to find those gaps and fill them in. And then this whole idea of prior experiences and mindset, and particularly in my area, may not be so much with you all, but I don't want to say that. I mean, I'm sure there are areas like this. I get students all the time who come to me and they have aspirations of doing things that are math intensive, and they tell me about how they've never been good at math. And that's this idea of a mindset, right? And letting prior experiences cloud that. And we could talk about how that could be in the positive or negative, right? You could have a student that comes to you and they're not doing well in a particular area, and then they want to tell you about how they did well in that area all the time up until they get to you, right? And that too is an issue. But we really want students to feel like, if I work hard at something and I get help, I should say this, how good I can be at it is unknowable. That's this idea of a growth mindset. There are limits to what we can do. It's just that we have no idea what those limits are, because we haven't gotten to that outer limit yet. So we want to make sure that when you hear students talking about, I've never been good at, I can't do this, that those are your opportunities to kind of remind them that most of us didn't start out good at anything. As a matter of fact, none of us did, right? We didn't start out good at it. It was work and direction, and that's what you're going to provide them. All right, and then that goes into this idea of attribution. Again, if you hear students saying things like, I did well on that test because Dr. Moore didn't grade it hard, right? That is an external reason why they did well on that test. versus I did well on that test because you told me that I should actually read the material in the book. I spent a lot of time reading, and that helped me improve my performance. That's an internal reason why I did better on the test, right? So when you hear students attributing their successes or failures to external entities, we want to correct that and help them figure out what the internal things were that were causing them issues, because that's where we can work, right? And then that's them saying, I have control over my success. It's not external. It's not the faculty member. It's not the institution. There's none of those things. It's really them. All right, so I'm going to finish up and I'll just talk to you about 10 strategies that kind of pull all of this together. So the first one, and you may have some input on this, you may not, but you may be able to go back and have some input with the faculty member, and that is aligning objectives, instructional strategies, and actually I put outcomes, so that should be assessments. So you have an objective in the class that students are supposed to be able to do something. Then there's some instructional strategy. We're going to work in groups. We're going to do a flipped classroom, whatever it is. That should make sense for helping students achieve the objective. And then you've been working on an objective. You know that you've been using a particular instructional strategy. That should be tied into the assessment, right? The assessment should align with those other things that we were doing. Otherwise, who knows what we'll get, right? Mm-hmm. And someone told me this when I was a very new faculty member here at FAMU, and that is, don't ever confuse tedium for rigor. Mm-hmm. So I used to give tests, and inevitably all my tests would be, the answer to the question is 1.739276958, right? And students had to do long division and multiply, 3-digit numbers and all this. It was just tedious. It had nothing to do with their ability to do stuff. So what I've done is redesign all my tests so the answer is always 1 or 2 or A, right? So it's something that right, it's just, don't make it tedious for no reason. And that was a disconnect, because the students were always saying, wait a minute, when we were doing this stuff in class and doing homework, we didn't have to do all this long division, all this other crazy stuff you've got us doing. But now we get on the test and you have me doing that. So had I been doing that all along the way, then that would be fine. But that was kind of like this thing that I threw in there to kind of make me feel like my tests were challenging. Mm. So the challenging part was that they had to do a bunch of arithmetic and algebra. Mm-hmm. Identify appropriate levels of challenge, right? And this goes into, you want students to have these success points. So it's interesting because we talk about this idea of formative assessment, where students have, and I think one of my strategies here is these low stakes assessments where they can fail and it's not going to kill their grade, so it's kind of like that quiz that maybe you give once a week in the recitation, and they have 100 of those quizzes and you take 20 of them, and everybody generally gets an A on that part because you really have to just take them. But that allows me 80 times where I could come in there and not have a clue and mess it all up. And then you have an opportunity to look at me and say, you don't have a clue, let me fix it, right? So you want to make sure that the levels of challenge are not too high, because it wouldn't be good, for example, if every time a student took your test, they got a 25, and then you magically said a 25 was an A, right? Because I don't ever feel like I got it. I feel like you were just hooking me up.
Oh, so that would kind of speak against the, I guess, the practice maybe some of us get into, where we do a lot of curving, right?
Well, yes, but tied to the reason why we have to, right? So that we're trying to, and again, I know there are things that students have to learn, right? So, Dr. Moore, to get out your class, I got to learn some stuff, but if I don't get out of it, so you can't just make it so that, I'll just only ask students all the things they know how to do. But we should be triggered if what we're having to do all the time is say, somebody got a 70, I'll just give them 30 points, and I'll give everybody 30 points, so I'm raising the grades. Because what we really should be looking for is, how can we make it so that our students kind of just earn the distribution?
Excellent. I see. Yeah.
Because that helps them, and it helps us as well. Mm-hmm. I kind of talked about it, but providing low-stakes opportunities for students to gain confidence and receive feedback. Those are the two things. So you're kind of scaffolding the level of difficulty as we're working towards some sort of what we call summative assessment. The difference between summative and formative assessments is really what it sounds like. Formative assessments are for practice. It's not time for me to show you that I can do it all. I'm working on a piece and you're going to give me some feedback. A summative assessment is like the final exam. I take the final exam, whatever I get, I get. I have no opportunity to come back. And so you want to give lots of these low stakes formative assessments along the way before you get to the summative assessment, because the goal is to have all the students very comfortable with the material by the time they get to the place where you're saying, okay, do or die. Right. And you want to make sure the students understand that this is not a do or die. This is for us to figure out where you're having some difficulty, and I can provide you with some really targeted feedback.
And does that relate, does that go along with the grading in terms of, let's say maybe in one of your calculus classes, Dr. Stephens, would you therefore put more points, would you associate more points with some of those formative assessments? So over the years, have you seen that? Have you seen more points associated with formative and less with summative? How does that work out?
So actually, I think that my formative assessment category might be somewhere between 10 and 15% of the students' grades, because I'm using it for two things. One is to give them feedback, and one to motivate them to do things. I'm in a flipped classroom. I need the students to read and watch videos beforehand. So they'll always have some sort of quiz that they do as they're watching the video. It stops and they need to answer a question. But the idea is that it doesn't have to be a lot. There have to be a lot of them. And you want to structure them so that if the students are doing the practice that you want them to do, they'll all get good grades on it, right?
There you go. There you go. Okay. So it's not a matter of, because otherwise they're not going to want to practice.
That's
because
right.
They're going to feel as though I got to get a perfect grade on this.
That's right.
See what you mean? Okay.
So it's never about the grade as much as it is the quality of your practice. If your practice is good, if you watch the video, you did the assignments throughout the video, the little quiz, you get 10 out of 10. Because that's what I want you to do, right? And then I look at that and I can give you some feedback on how you're doing. Clearly articulate expectations. Again, this goes into the tedium part. Often we think that we're making our course rigorous because we leave out things and say the student should be able to fill in the gaps. I had book club with faculty members yesterday, and they were talking about that, and I was trying to get them to see that this idea of watering something down or giving it away, that's not what this is. If you want me to do something, you need to be very clear about what you want me to do. Very clear. You need to make sure I understand, why are we doing this? What is it that you want me to get out of it? Don't leave anything out. Hold me accountable for being able to do it, but don't send me off on a scavenger hunt, particularly when I am, a freshman or a sophomore. We can do that with graduate students, right? But because that's part of their, they had to learn how to find problems and solve problems all by themselves, right? But undergraduates aren't there yet. Provide students with some flexibility and control. That's what we were talking about, giving them some autonomy. So whenever possible, multiple options for ways that they can demonstrate competency. Goes without saying, you have to show some enthusiasm for subjects. And when I put this here as a strategy, because there were 1,000 of them and I was trying to come up with 10, I thought about not putting it here, but I also thought about my experience of TAing for a course that I wasn't interested in, right? And that's where it's not that I wasn't interested in mathematics. It's that somebody said, hey, could you TA for this undergraduate real variables course? I'm like, I don't like real variables. And then I'm walking into class and basically I got the screw face, right? So how am I supposed to make sure that those students are getting the experience they should be getting if I'm really, you find yourself saying, you'll never use this, or, right? We want to be careful about those things. And then we can do this as TAs, even if it's not prescribed from the lead faculty member. And that is provide rubrics, exemplars, and practice assessments, so that students understand what good work looks like. You will be shocked if you have not had the experience of having to grade a project that students submitted with and without a rubric. Without a rubric, God only knows what you might get. Some of them are going to be great. Some of them will be lacking. With a rubric, at least the students, and rubrics are checklists, right? Students can check off, okay, I had that. Okay, I had that. So you're not missing all these things that in general, you were just saying, I was just going to give you 5 points for making sure you had a title page. Yet you didn't have one, right? So if they have a rubric, they know 5 points for a title page. And by the way, the rubric can show that this is what a good title page is, right? Or handing the students or showing at, before you or when you give the assignment, here are 3 assignments from last year. Somebody did a podcast, somebody did a video, somebody wrote a paper, and these were A's, and this is why. They did this, right? And then practice assessments. This is what you're going to be expected to be able to do. It's not I gave you the practice assessment and then the assessment was the same, that just changed the numbers. That's not what I'm saying. But an opportunity to understand, for example, that, when I see my test, it's going to be conceptual. It's not going to be just multiply some numbers and tell me, how much the load is, right? So that I understand that, Dr. Moore is going to ask me conceptual questions on my test. I need to prepare for those differently. The next strategy is going to come from this idea of course climate. And course climate is just, how do students feel in the classroom? Like the obvious things, and no issues with gender or sexuality or nationality, any of those other things that might come into play and might ruin the learning environment. So one is to adjust the tone on your syllabus. And I put this here for those of you all who are going to go off and be new faculty members, but you can also think about the way that you give instructions. And so, and I know I have about 5 more minutes, Dr. Moore, and I'm almost finished. So here are 2 examples. And these came from my syllabus. So one was, attendance is mandatory. It is the university's policy that with 4 unexcused absences, a student can receive a failing grade. A student who misses a class is responsible for all material missed. So this was a statement on my syllabus that I pulled. Mm-hmm. Here's another statement on my syllabus that's related to the same kind of thing. Attendance is a vital part of student success. Because we use a flipped classroom model, most activities are done in class to develop your analytical and critical thinking skills. Students who miss class will not benefit from these activities and will miss crucial opportunities to improve. If you have an issue that requires you to miss class, please get in touch with me so we can work together to ensure you do not fall behind.
Sounds nice.
So you had 2 statements of policy. Both of them indicate that ultimately there is a negative consequence for you not attending class. But the tones were very different, right? I mean, one sounded very punitive, and the other one said, hey, I'm trying to work with you. I'm working with you. And it gave an explanation as to why you need to come to class, right? Which is really important for 18, 19-year-olds. They may not get that. Mm-hmm. Because they may have gotten good grades in high school and they realized there was no reason to go to class, right? I was the only clown in the classroom who wasn't acting a fool. Therefore, the teacher was going to give me a good grade. And the teacher had to spend all the rest of the time trying to keep the rest of the people in order, right? To one level or another, right? People don't turn their homework, other things. So I'm thinking class is not really important, but it's really just all in the tone. It's not changing policy. And we can think about that when we're giving instructions as well. Strategy 9, help students develop a growth mindset. And this is for you too. Often when I'm talking to faculty members, they don't truly believe that all the students in their class can be successful. They are looking at students on the first day and saying, not you, maybe you, not you, right? And I know that Dr. Moore has probably had this experience because I've had students in my class and looked at them and said, they will never be able to do this class. And they turn out to be some of my best students, right? So kind of looking at people and stereotyping and all those things go into it, but making sure that we have a growth mindset and then ensuring that students are attributing their successes and failures to themselves, right? Always.
I love that. This strategy number 9 is on point. I mean, all of the strategies are good, Dr. Stephens, but this one is so poignant because there was a student I was speaking with telling me that he was not understanding the material. And it was, if I recall, it was a couple of days before the final. And this is the first time I'd heard the student say that. But here's the thing. If the faculty member has a growth mindset, then I should be asking myself, why am I just finding this out? Mm-hmm. So do I need to structure something different so that students who are not feeling good about the course have an opportunity to let me know that? Because some students don't feel comfortable coming to office hours, so it's got to be, I hear a lot of faculty saying things that make you feel as though they believe that there's certain students just they can't get it.
Yeah.
Students aren't going to get it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's definitely it.
Yeah.
And the last one, incorporate reflection and metacognition into assignments. And where possible, into the assignment. That's part of the grade. And so here, the one idea is this idea of a test wrapper. So you ask students how much time do they prepare, how much time they spend looking at specific preparation activities you may have. Have them look at the percentage of points they lost on specific objectives, because that helps them identify where they're struggling. Have them talk about 3 things you plan to do differently on the next exam, right, in preparation. And then, of course, always asking, what can we do to help them, right? And we often may hear things that we don't want to hear, because that, again, will be them sometimes trying to attribute their failure to us. So they want to tell us how we're bad teachers and all those other things. Ignore those and get to the things that could help. So it might be that, your office hours are at a time that I can't make it. Those types of things you want to hear. And then metacognition, it's a word, it's a very cool word. I love it. It just means thinking about how you think. It's like somebody explained this to me one time. It's like having a second brain, and the second brain sits outside of your head, and all it does is watches how your brain thinks. So asking students, what did you learn? I've asked students after activities, why do you think I gave you this activity? What was it that you were supposed to take away from it? What skills do you need to work on? How would you prepare differently based upon the feedback you've received? And how have your skills evolved over the past 3 assignments, 2 assignments, since the last test, whatever that time frame looks like for you? But giving them an opportunity to reflect on, getting past what we often do, get an assessment, look at it, like the grade, don't like the grade, chunk it. Either way, it goes in trash. Don't ever review, just chunk it, right? We want to reflect so we can make these adjustments that are necessary for success. We did it, Dr. Moore. I think I got in under my hour or 50 minutes.
That's right. You did. You did.
Thank you all
very much. You did. We started a little bit after, so I think you did great. I slowed you down with a couple of extra points and questions that you might not have needed. But thank you very much, Dr. Stephens. We do have a number of people here. Are there any questions or comments before we let Dr. Stephens go?
No, this was great by me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, I appreciate you, Dr. Stephens, for speaking to us. I think because like inspiring just for the future and currently if I have the opportunity to mentor a student, but I think another thing that I'm be considering is like, how did I feel when I was a student, when I struggled, or just noticing like classroom culture. I think that's another aspect of it. I think when you were talking about just the practicals of things, one thing I noticed recently being a grad student when I'm taking classes is a lot of students aren't comfortable with just asking questions. So it's like, as a professor, do you create an environment where students feel comfortable to ask and to admit that they don't understand and not feel like they're less than if they don't get something. So I think that's major key as well.
Definitely so.
Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you, Dr. Stephens, for the great presentation. It was very insightful. I have actually a question. You touched upon the importance of showing that you can relate to the students. And as a graduate student right now, yes, we can easily show them that we relate to them. But let's say if we like in the future, hopefully become a junior faculty, how can we show the student that we can relate to them? What are potential examples that we can do to show that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So the one thing that I'll say is that all those things that make it so that you have 3 undergraduates attached to you right now, don't give them up, even though you will have different time pressures. So what typically happens when we become faculty members is that we're very consumed with research and committee work. And quite frankly, for a lot of us, teaching becomes the least important thing. so students can read that. And so just continuing to find ways to, first of all, come and attend seminars like you are now so that you can learn newest and best practices. And then just remember how you're relating with your students now and never lose that. I always tell people, regardless of the institution that you're working at and what that research level is, the most important thing that you will do will be the instruction and mentoring piece for students. That is what universities are all about. And those other things are there to support that. That's why we do the research and bring in grant money. But your students have to always be your first priority.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hello, Doctor. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
Yes.
Dr. Stevens, how you doing? This is Juan K. Park. Can
Hey,
I
how you
lend to
doing?
that? Good. I just wanted to lend to that question I was just asking the graduate student. I think it's a little easier than a lot of professors make it to relate to your students. Sometimes it's the same way you relate to your friends. You just seem like you care about other things outside of the classroom.
Mm.
You talk to them about, how things are going. You mention the current event that you might be interested in. Just kind of break up the monotony of walking in lectures and leave. You just, take a minute or two to just talk to your students. I think they really relate to not just walking in right into the classroom and then walking right out. Walking into like a home environment. Sometimes just talking to them like they're regular people, I think really helps with that.
Oh, that's great, Twan. Thank you.
Yeah, Twan, and I think I touched on that a little bit last week, that making sure that your students understand you're a human being, right? And I think that's what you're really talking about, that we have interests outside of the class. I think Dr. Moore last week talked about, students, when you come to office hours, the opportunity to hear about my interest and things that are in common. So we build relationships that are different than just I'm the instructor up on the stage, right? That I'm a human being and I can connect to you.
Good point. All righty. Do we have anybody else? Any other comments or questions? Well, Dr. Stevens, I just want to thank you. You've shown that our students, we always say the students have a lot of work to do in this class or the other class, but it seems like in reality, we have some work to do if we want to get them motivated. So that's great. Thank you very much for participating, everyone. And this presentation and conversation will be available on YouTube, along with the others that we have done in the past. And there'll be some more information along with probably a link to the book Dr. Stevens presented down in the description box. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.